Hey guys, just hopping on to record a short video today. Meats, beef, and sourcing it. If you're just getting into it and trying to understand or getting a bit of clarity on what you're reading on the label, I thought we'd do this by going through a couple of popular online beef sourcing or butcher websites. So let me zoom myself up a little bit. And the first website I found that seems like a really cool butcher shop is this website called Alpine Butcher. So these guys are pretty much just an online butcher shop. So they're selling their meat, their pork, their lamb, which I appreciate. I'm a big fan of lamb. It's very hard to get it in the US, I found. But what we'll go into is there's a little about me, and we'll just talk about what they mean by these prime beef cuts and how to interpret that. So, their butcher shop here with their USDA prime beef, the highest grade available in the United States. Their pork and chicken is humanely raised as well as antibiotic free and hormone free. And then their proud history of butchering. So, sounds great. So, what is this USDA prime? First of all, I'm trying to understand a little bit about that. So there is mandatory federal inspection of meat quality when it's raw, and that's for wholesomeness. But when we're talking here about this USDA Prime, this is actually an optional kind of opt-in by the retailer or the producer as a quality grading based on the tenderness and I guess semi-objective perceived quality of that cut, with Prime being as it's advertised here, but being that highest regarded quality level. So here we'll look at our little USDA grading scheme. So the three we'll talk about is Prime, Choice, and Select. There's three others. There's utility canners and cutters. They're not really relevant here when we're talking about buying cuts of meat, because usually those three are the cuts that are utilized in ground beef or other products. This quality scale is based off of the marbling of the meat. And when I say marbling, I mean how much fat streaking is present within that meat. So I've talked previously about Wagyu beef and how the Wagyu breed is considered to be unique in its marbling because there's a large amount of infiltration of fat throughout the entire cut, and we're hoping that marbling, that quantity of marbling, will then kind of correspond with how tasty and tender that meat is when we cook it, because the fat is the part that dissolves when it's heated, and that kind of makes our beef a bit softer and more tender. So our top scale is Prime. This is the best. Young, well-fed beef cattle, so that's key there. Young animals are going to be the most attractive in terms of eating. A young finished animal, I don't mean like a juvenile, I mean like a finished, fattened. So there should be abundant marbling, and this is kind of your best hotel cut. So that's what that butcher shop we were looking at was advertising. They only sell Prime. Next is Choice. I think Choice I see a lot in supermarkets or other places that are a little bit less premium. But this is also a good cut of meat. It just has less marbling, so it's considered moderate marbling, right? So still juicy and still flavorful, but less tender. And then the last one being Select, so just considered leaner, a bit less tender, but cheaper because of that quality grade. So this is the USDA quality grading, and that's optional and kind of opted in by maybe the retailer because it gives them a way of advertising and assigning different standards when they charge for their beef. So it's a sensible option. Next store I was going to look at are these guys, Mountain Primal. So they seem to be, they're a pretty cool company. They kind of do their own thing. It seems to be one farm that raises all these animals, and then they process and they market their stuff. So they got all these different snacks. They have their beef and their pork, and then their products are great. I mean, premium, but I think that's part of their marketing. They're a premium price. Let's then dig into their FAQ and talk about what they're saying in some of these points, so we can just understand it a bit better. So these guys do their own ranching here at Mountain Primal, and they sell their stuff direct. So this is their business model. They only sell this American Highland beef and then this American Berkshire pork. So they're two kind of heritage breeds, they're calling them. And this American Highland beef, this is the Scottish Highland cattle that we saw on their splash page. um, these horned kind of woolly cattle, and this is like the Americanized version. And I guess we'll talk here about why they want to do their American Highland beef. So the Highland cattle, I guess it's a cut of meat that's considered to be a little bit leaner and a little bit healthier, like lower in cholesterol and lower in fat, while still, I guess, being very marbled and tender, and that's what makes it attractive. Then the Berkshire porks, that's a heritage pork, so instead of our kind of classic pale pork that we see at the grocery store, it's a darker, kind of sweeter color is how they describe it. And this, there's a couple of these different heritage pork breeds, and I guess it's a bit fattier and potentially tastier, so that's their selling point there. Are they humanely raised? So they're very, very serious about the rearing of their animals and doing it in a low stress scenario. And I'll definitely say that keeping stress low and avoiding stressing your animals is a really, really, really vital part to rearing any livestock. You're working with an animal. If they're stressed out, they're not gaining weight, they're not eating, they're not happy, they're not doing well, you're not doing well. Your best interest is to have them unstressed. So this emphasis on avoiding stress is great. It creates toxins that negatively affect the quality of the meat. I'm not really sure what they mean there by toxins. There's specific circumstances where the corticosteroids, the stress hormones released by the beef, by a stress response, can alter and reduce the quality of your beef product. But that I'm not really sure what they're talking about there. That's kind of a bit off the cuff. Rather than being jacked up on hormones. So this we'll talk about. It's a bit of a verbose claim. So modern beef cattle rearing in the US, some of it does utilize hormones. They utilize implants of these androgens, these kind of like reproductive hormones that influence the growth rates of animals. So when they're young, they grow faster or whatever. That's from different hormonal reasons. And then there's other hormones that regulate their energy balances as they go on. So some people will implant estradiols into their animals, and that improves their weight gain over time. And that's kind of done as an efficiency thing. So you're more productive, your net profit is better because your animal gained weight a little bit more efficiently on the same amount of food in a less amount of time. And there's multiple. The positives are you have a much more efficient system there. You're producing the same or more for less inputs, so your system has a lower impact. So environmentally, I'm all about doing things more efficiently and more productively. The more you get out of the same input, the better, because you're less of an impact on the wider environment. But my big principle in terms of being conscious of our impacts are the transportation costs, because carbon emissions from the transportation industry is really the king of our emissions. Agriculture really doesn't contribute that much to our carbon budget as a country and as a planet. The post-farm gate carbon footprint, which is how much carbon is burnt getting that animal to your plate after it's finished its harvest, that is, I think, a much bigger deal than the carbon we're producing in the rearing of the animal. I can't say that there is a really strong reason to say that it's harmful to you, because when you implant these hormones into the cows, and you can never claim, so here they're saying hormone free, which I'm not sure if that is the correct way to label it, because you can never say a food product is hormone free or has no hormones, because all food products have hormones. They're animal and plant matter, there's hormones in them that occur naturally. So if you eat a piece of beef that didn't have added hormones or supplemented hormones, it still has levels of those hormones. So if we look at this little graph here, and this is showing the estrogenic activity of our common foods. So what I mean by that estrogenic activity is estradiol-like compounds that affect the human body in an estrogenic way. So if you're eating beef from a non-implanted steer, you're getting this 0.85 nanograms of estrone. And then if you're eating beef from an implanted steer, it is 1.2 nanograms. So you see it's significantly higher. It is higher. There's a significant difference between these figures if you dig into the research. So there is more estrogenic and activity and more estrogen in an implanted hormone implanted animal. But then if we look up the list, milk is much, much higher. That's non-antibiotic supplemented milk. People don't use estrogen in dairy production. Eggs, you've got 94 nanograms. Peanuts, pretty high, and then all the way up to soy flour, and I believe, which is in the millions. And I believe then some of our cruciferous vegetables are very, very high as well, like our cabbages and our broccolis. Those plants naturally have some estrogen-like compounds that are present when you eat them. So that's kind of it's a personal discretion thing. If you prefer systems that don't implant these hormones to enhance growth, that's your discretion. So this I love. Temple Grandin is fantastic. If you guys ever read anything about her or watch her movies, she is an animal science professor who developed a lot of the kind of stress-free humane livestock processing facilities, so where they slaughter and harvest the animals. She did a lot in terms of implementing like her 10-point kind of checklist on, is this a stress-free facility? And then her handling techniques and her her cow flows are really, really, really great. Her stuff is fantastic. So the fact that they're using a Temple Grandin strategy, that's great. That's a really, really efficient and really welfare friendly, stress-free kind of scenario. Do we use hormones or antibiotics? Nope. The only thing I would say about someone not using antibiotics or raising their beef antibiotic free, that's great. When you eat beef or you eat dairy or you eat eggs, they're always antibiotic free at the point of consumption, because if you use them for any reason, there's mandatory withdrawals periods that are held, and those are very, very strictly held. If you violate any of them, you get a big warning. If you violate it again, you get a financial penalty. If you violate it again, you are not allowed to sell the product anymore. It's very strictly monitored and strictly regulated, especially in milk and also in beef. Samples are taken of almost everything that's shipped in and processed, and that is something that is complied with very highly in my experience, because of the negative outcomes if you break it. So in generally speaking, produce or milk or meat products that we buy in the US or in Europe, and definitely most other parts of the world, but most other parts of the world are at that point of consumption antibiotic free because of the system that's in place already. So when people say that they are antibiotic free from birth, that means, or they're antibiotic free totally, that means that they never used an antibiotic in this animal's life course. And that's fine. That is one of the things you need to be organic. I, being a veterinarian, I'm not that excited about not using antibiotics, because to me antibiotics are a necessary evil and a necessary part of but a part of life. Like if you get sick, if your child gets sick, if your dog gets sick, sometimes they need an antibiotic depending on what made them sick. If it's an infection that requires an antibiotic, then that's what they need. And if you are organic, I think there's a clause in it that you cannot deny an animal an antibiotic if it needs it, because that would be non-welfare friendly. That is not okay. Like, that's denying basic medical care to something that's suffering and potentially going to die. So that is not allowed. That's listed as not being permissible if you're an organic producer. But if you do have to use an antibiotic in that animal, you have to remove it from the organic chain. You can't be processed through your organic label at that point. It would have to be separated and maybe sold. But yeah, I'm not that excited about saying we're antibiotic free. I mean, if you take an antibiotic tomorrow and you process it and to deal with your infection, and your body processes it, do you think that antibiotic is still present in your urine, in your kidneys, in your tissue, like 2 weeks later, 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, 6 months later? It depends on the drug. Some of them are, because of the nature of them, but most of them are not. And already in beef and milk production in the US, we're very, very strict on what antibiotics we're allowed to use to make sure that they have low persistence and low residues, and then those residues are tightly monitored. So every bottle of antibiotics you buy for an animal has on its label very clearly stated how long until you can sell this animal for beef or milk this cow for milk after you've used it. The less you use, the better, but I wouldn't be that excited about saying you've never used one and that you never should, because sometimes you just have to treat an animal. And I do not like seeing animals not get treated when they need to. I hate seeing animals suffer, but it sounds like these guys are doing a really great job raising them, so their need to use antibiotics is very, very low. I just don't see the need in being 100% antibiotic free all of the time. They're saying here that they're custom grass grain mix to finish. I do like the taste of grain finished beef in general. I kind of like the corn fed beef that is popular here in the US, and it's definitely true that that kind of higher energy, grain based or kind of concentrate based mixed diet can give a better marbling and a nicer taste at the finish. So I'm not that excited about being 100% grass reared. I think grass rearing in your system can give a nice quality to the meat. It kind of gives a little bit of yellowing to it, and it changes the profile of the meat. But it's fine that they're doing grass-fed grain finish. That's cool. And then, are you certified organic? No. So they decided to not go organic, and that's fine. They've made the choice on their personal decision on their standards and what is important to them. And that's fine, because we'll look now at what organic means in the US. In the US, to get organic, you have to tick certain boxes, and by being organic, you're saying by labeling yourself as organic, you've met a couple of these certain parameters of these standards to get it, and that's kind of your take home. It doesn't really say a lot beyond that. So let's flip over to the organic. So this is the USDA's requirements and standards for organic produce. And if we jump here to livestock and poultry, so livestock and poultry, they must be raised under organic management. They must be fed feed products that are 100% organic. So that's the feeds that kind of comes up here from our crops. We're not using certain fertilizers or pesticides, so they are also organic. So it has to be within that same chain. Dairy animals have to be managed organically from the last 12 months in order for milk or dairy products to be sold. So if you are buying organic milk, what that means is your dairy cow that produced it has, at least for the last 12 months, been under this organic regime. So it's been eating organic food, and it has been, I guess, separated from these certain products that would be considered non-organic for at least 12 months before that milk was produced. Then preventative management practices must be used to keep animals healthy, and that's really important. Prohibited substances may not be sold, and that's mainly antibiotics. There's a list, and I might make another video on that some other time. There's a list of what is prohibited and what's not. Vaccines are allowed, so they can vaccinate, but they will not use antibiotics. There's some other compounds they can use, but not a whole lot in terms of therapeutics. So then producers may not withhold treatment from sick or injured animals. So if an animal needs an antibiotic, it gets it. I believe they're allowed certain painkillers and some other kind of non-antibiotic therapeutics, but antibiotics are on the prohibited list. But if an animal needs it, it has to get it. It's not acceptable to not treat that animal if it requires that. That's inhumane. But then that animal cannot be sold as organic. I know from experience that a number of organic farms may also hold a regular farm in their same name, and they can then, that allows them to transfer animals between. So if they do need to treat an animal, they can transfer it to their other holding, which is not under the organic label. And then ruminants must be out in pasture for the entire grazing season, but not less than 120 days. So that means, and that depends on where you live, right? Because people, different parts of the country have different grazing seasons based on their weather. And then 30% of their feed has to be from pasture. And that's fine, because, grass, rearing cattle is great, but you'll find that 100%, and if you work with cattle or you start to get into it a bit more, you'll find that a 100% grass diet can be a challenge. It's not potentially the most nutritionally balanced. It's very dependent on your soil, because the grass, the minerals and the profile of nutrients in your grass is kind of a reflection of the soil and what's in that soil. So certain things might be lacking, other things might be too high. Your energy, depending on the time of the year, might fluctuate. Is your grass very watery? Is it very stemmy? How did you manage your pastures? It's not as easy as, open the gate, put a cow in a field, pull it out again. There's a lot going into that nutrient balance off the pasture. And then they have to have access to outdoors all year round. So even if you're wintering them, if they're inside, they just need to have a little exercise pen. So, when people perceive, oh, I'm buying organic, I'm getting a happier, healthier animal, we really don't know much beyond what is stated here. Like, this is all you need. And not that it's not difficult to do. This is, this is still a great list of standards, but this is exactly what you need to qualify as organic. So, we can't really go beyond the label with that. I personally don't eat or buy organic. I'm just not interested. From working on and growing up with agriculture my whole life, um, the conventional from where I live and where I've been, I'm perfectly happy with, and usually is at a really, really, really high standard. The next one I want to talk about is Crowd Cow. Crowd Cow, I think, is a really cool function, a really cool website. They're kind of like an eBay for beef and meats, is the way I like to describe it. And we'll see here, they've got lots of different options. They've got fish, they've got grass-fed, they've got heritage, they've got pasture-reared. So they have a lot of different management options. They don't just do one specific type, like that grass-fed organic. They kind of like allow you the choice and the decision making. Now they've gotten into dog treats. It's a cool kind of like marketplace for different cuts. And what I really like is if you go shopping, you can actually browse by, I believe, farm. So you could pick, the closest one to you if shipping is something you want to mitigate. So already it's given me a few options in California. So then we'll go to their FAQ section. So where do their products, their producers are independent family farms to co-ops. So you kind of get a range of who you're buying from here. Is it good for farmers? Yes, we provide an avenue for our farmers to produce their meats. And I do like this function. Is kind of allowing you to take your product and market it online, and they're doing the marketing for you. So it's kind of making that facility available for these farmers. And then is it graded? Yes, is sourced under USDA inspection. So this is what I was saying about that mandatory federal inspection for raw meat, and that's just like the wholesomeness. Like, is there bacterial contamination? Is there disease, potential infectious diseases? That's just kind of a regulatory monitoring thing. And then their seafood, they sell wild caught and farm raised. I believe wild usually has higher omega-3 concentrations. I personally prefer farmed when I'm purchasing because they don't have to implement the trawling to catch the wild fish. But then I know that farmed fish, those little fish farms, can have large impacts on that local area because you have such a high concentration of fish in one place. There's also a fallout from that. So nothing's benign, but we're producing food. We have people on the planet that need to eat. It kind of goes hand in hand. You don't have people without food. There's nothing we can do in that way. Maybe we could live without cars and stop burning gas, but we can't live without food, and we definitely can't live a vegan lifestyle. That would be worse for the planet. So we have to do something to feed ourselves. Now the last guys I want to talk about are ButcherBox. ButcherBox are another cool facility. They kind of work on a subscription. So you sign up and you pick a plan, and then you get like a delivery frequency, and then you get your meat on that regular schedule. So let's go through and do a little plan. So let's look at their custom box and see what is available. So you can get either 9 to 14 or 18 to 26 pounds. And let's look at their cuts. Then so we can kind of add what we want. So obviously if I'm creating this box and it's a set price, I'm going to want to add the steaks, I guess. Why wouldn't I? And then some filet mignon, some chicken. So these are free range and organic. These guys are 100% grass fed and grass finished. So remember the Primal kitchen guys, they said they were grass fed, but they would grain finished in a hybrid kind of scenario. These guys are grass fed, grass finished. We'll do our salmon. So you see they've got a nice selection, so you can custom and kind of set what you want and get your box sent to you on like a monthly or a 6 weekly thing. Now let's look at their website and their FAQ. So our meat, when it comes to eating meat, quality matters definitely. So, and it's influenced by how the animals lived. Was it healthy and content? Was it ever given antibiotics or hormones? Was it humanely raised on a farm with sustainable practices? Well, I would say that our conventional farms do a really, really great job at humanely raising their animals. They manage them really efficiently because they have a lot of animals. They have to raise them efficiently and humanely, or it's not going to work for very long. Numbers are a great test of something. If you are raising animals, it's easy to raise 20 or 30 or 50 because you can keep a good close eye on what's going on at all times. You take that to 200, 300, 500. Now you need to make sure that your systems that are in place are able to handle that. And if they're not, things break down very, very fast because you can no longer keep everything like in your hand and keep on top of it. So, usually that kind of law of scale, when these farms get bigger, they have to be well managed or they don't last, they go out of business. So I'm comfortable usually with big farms when I visit them, knowing that for them to maintain and to be profitable and to be well run, and for those animals to be producing and being happy and healthy, that their systems are well organized and they're running well. So I think grass-fed beef is higher in omega 3, the omega 3 to 6 ratio. It's higher for 3 if they're grass-fed. If they're like grain finished or whatever, that ratio is different. It's a little bit lower on the 3 side, but beef isn't a very high source of omega 3 anyway. So yeah, it's something you can advertise because it's not wrong to say that it's a source of omega 3. But beef, if it's grass fed, whether it's grass fed or not a huge source of omega 3. So don't be counting on it for your weekly omega 3 supply. Pigs now, commercial pigs are managed indoors. There's a lot of kind of good reasons for that. Pigs are very, very, very sensitive to temperature, to stress, to their environment. I don't know if you've ever worked with pigs. They are big children. So when they're managed in inside houses, they're temperature controlled. They're like, the pens are number controlled. Their environments are managed so that they're low stress. And pigs also get a lot of parasites, and they get certain bacteria and infections from the soil and all that kind of jazz. So being outside is totally fine, but you just have to be very conscious that if your pigs are outside, they're picking up a lot of worms. There's a low margin of profit on pig production. They have to be raised pretty fast, and they have to put on a lot of weight pretty fast. So the margin's tight. A lot of why they're so controlled when they're raised is to maximize that gain. If anything stresses them out, it's going to lower their growth rate, and then your margin is going to be lost. So when you just do it outside, you kind of lose a lot of that control over your ability to maximize their weight gain. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to make that profit margin. But I guess if you're working on these heritage breeds and you have this kind of premium finished product, you can charge at a higher level to mitigate the fact that your growth rate margin might have been lost a little bit. So that's just the difference between when you're like kind of mass marketing your commercial pork versus your cuts that are like this heritage or this speciality. And then they're free range organic chickens spend their days roosting in barns and exploring the outdoors. That's great. They're like free range. I love chickens running around outside. I love having them outside in the garden and like running around and playing. I will say that when it comes to caged versus cage free for your commercial rearing, I'm not a big fan of like the cage free style in California, because they're now kind of in bedded pens, and that shift to these bedded packs means that chickens have been getting a lot more parasites, because the parasites are in their feces and they're spreading them between them. They're potentially getting these lesions and sores in their feet because they're kind of running around in the poop. When they were caged, and they're still caged or modified caged, these kind of like welfare friendly cages, the modified cage setup, which is the rest of the US, I think, still, just not California. And it just had like a kind of like a slotted bottom, so that when they would poop, it would go down through it, and it was much, much cleaner. So I know since they've removed caged hens in California, the incidence of some of these deaths from parasites and these parasite burdens and like these kind of diseases related with just being unhygienic have gone up, which is sad. We wanted to get rid of the cages because it's nicer to have the chickens, I guess, in more space and more opportunity to socialize, but there's a balance between all of these things. Then is it welfare friendly? The fact that they're now suffering from more diseases, was it better welfare when they were a little bit more confined but had less diseases? It's hard to strike that balance. And the last thing I wanted to talk about here was their FAQ. So 100% grass fed, grass finished, yes. Pasture raised, yes. Humanely raised, yes. We source our meat from people we trust, inspired by Temple Grandin, great. We're sourcing the majority of our meat from Australia. So because of this is a reason why I just personally wouldn't purchase from them, because I'm not okay with the shipping of the meat from Australia to the US when I could source it here. And I live in the US. I'd prefer to support the local beef industry. I'm nothing against Australia. If I lived in Australia, I would support that. But personally, I would prefer to source my beef from the country I'm in, or as close to me as possible. They're 100% grass fed. They do not use these CAFOs, concentrated animal feedlot operations. That's their choice. I personally don't have a big problem with CAFOs. CAFOs, like I said earlier about large farms, they're usually very well managed because they have to be. But that's their business strategy. So that is ButcherBox. So that was like a little overview of, you know, a couple of these different online beef options, and just like a little review of some of the terminology, what it means. Hopefully you now are a little bit more confident in picking through these and understanding what is going on, what you're reading, and what you're getting when you buy these things. If you have any questions or any comments on any of the things that I looked at here, let me know. But I hope you enjoyed the video after that. Thank you very much for watching.